have a busy day today. How many events did you have today? This is like number 3 of 10.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Nancy Lindborg. I'm the president here at U.S. Institute of Peace, and I'm just delighted to welcome everybody here for this event. For those who are joining us online and via webcast, I'd like to invite you to follow us on social media, any platform, hashtag USIP Peace Teachers, and at USIP. So I encourage you to follow along, check out our new podcast at usip.org/podcast. That will include this event and a lot of other very interesting things. I also want to give a very special welcome to today's event to our moderator and a great friend of USIP, Joanne Leadham Ackerman. Joanne will be moderating the event today. She's a member of our International Advisory Council, and she's also an acclaimed author, so I invite you to check out her work. USIP was founded in 1984 by members of Congress who were seized by the thought that we would benefit as a nation from having an institution dedicated to waging peace. And we work around the world with partners to help them manage conflict, to prevent it and resolve it. And we operate on the assumption that there will always be conflict. It can even be very transformative and constructive, but you need to be able to manage it so it doesn't become violent and tear apart countries and nations. We pursue this vision of violent conflict by working around the world with partners, but also working here at home. And part of our mandate as legislated by Congress was to express America's commitment to peace around the world and to bring that vision to Americans. And so that's part of what our peace education team does. And we look at what is behind the headlines. I think all of us here are inundated by scenes of despair and conflict around the world. Part of what we try to do is to illuminate that behind those headlines there are people who are working every day to make peace possible, especially in very difficult places like Afghanistan, Iraq. I just got back from Tunisia, where I had a chance to meet with students who were working in their university to mediate the conflict between the Salafist student union and the secular student union. And they had recently, over the past year, erupted into scuffles and violence. And they had organized as a student body to mediate between these two groups and form a peace club. They are very committed to bringing peace to their university and now rolling this model out across the country. In Colombia, we've worked with women, a network of women around the country who have learned to be mediators in their own communities, and then they were a part of the peace talks that ended that 50-year-old conflict last year. And in Iraq, we've worked consistently for the last 15 years with a group of Iraqi facilitators who are mediating conflicts between tribal, religious, and ethnic leaders so that they have peace in their communities and people can come home. In just Tikrit, one city in Iraq, a peace agreement has allowed almost 400,000 people to return home in the last year and a half. So these are real people who are working to make peace happen. Peace is very practical. It's possible, and it's a process. And we're committed to bringing these stories to young Americans. This is a part of our original mandate, and we do this through our great public education team who reaches out to organizations, schools across the country. I was in Charlotte, North Carolina this spring, where I had a chance to meet with the World Affairs Council as well as schools and universities in town. And every time I have a chance to go do one of these trips, I am inspired by the energy of people around this country who care about this issue, who engage with this issue. And this is why USIP's public education work is so important. We challenge the assumptions that there is nothing but conflict going around the world, and we challenge the headlines. And one of the most important ways that we do this is through the Peace Teachers Program, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So this is now in its third year, and the USIP Peace Teachers Program selects outstanding American educators who are themselves transforming the lives of hundreds of students every year. And we work with them to give them the kind of training and resources and support that helps to support and strengthen how they teach about pressing global issues of conflict around the world. So it is my great honor to be able to welcome 3 of our 4 2017-18 peace teachers this year to USIP. They are themselves exemplary American peace builders in action, and they have traveled a long way to be here. They will share their stories of the past year with us today. I had a chance to talk with them yesterday. And this is where work happens on the front line of enabling the next generation to be the kind of peace builders we all need them to be around the world. I am sorry I won't be able to stay for the whole conversation, but I know you'll learn a lot and be inspired like I was. Thank you, Joanne, again for being with us here today. And to introduce our peace teachers and get us underway, I'd like to turn it over to Megan Chabalowski, who manages our Peace Teachers program as part of our great public education team, the rest of whom are standing in the back, Yusuf and Louise. So, Megan, over to you. And thank you once again to our Peace Teachers for being here with us today and for the extraordinary work that you do.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us and for giving us that warm welcome. As Nancy says, I'm Megan Chabalowski, and I manage the Peace Teachers program on behalf of the public education team here at USIP. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. I see some familiar faces in the audience and some new ones, which is great. We're always glad to welcome new people to the Institute, so please make sure you say hi afterwards. We will turn to our special guests, our Peace Teachers, in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to share with you a bit more about this initiative that has brought us together today. The Peace Teachers program is a year-long professional development opportunity for American secondary school educators. It is rooted in the conviction that educators can be pivotal in bringing important global issues of conflict and peace into their classrooms, schools, and communities. So while educators often welcome this role, they may face a lot of challenges. They include curricular restrictions, limited class time, and a lack of information about how to teach about international conflict management and peace building, and especially in ways that are meaningful to their students. The Peace Teachers program then seeks to overcome these challenges by selecting 4 outstanding American secondary educators each year to receive, as Nancy said, training, resources, and support to strengthen their teaching of conflict and peace, and to serve as models for other educators across the country. So our Peace Teachers do not take their participation lightly. This is not a walk in the park over the year. They work closely with us throughout the school year as they develop their own understanding of international conflict management and peace building and discover new ways to teach about these concepts and skills in their classroom. They're introduced to our resources for educators, including our Peace Building Toolkit for educators, which some of you may know. It's a set of lesson plans designed to help teachers introduce peace-building themes and skills to their students. So you'll hear our teachers in their presentations talk about the toolkit. They may refer to the toolkit, and that's what they're talking about. And it is available on our website, by the way. Everything is on our website for free to download, so I suggest you take a look. Our teachers lead their school's participation in USIP's Peace Day Challenge in honor of the International Day of Peace on September 21st each year, which is a big way to kick off their school year. It's sort of a bit of trial by fire. They start this program and we say, by the way, you have to plan something for the International Day of Peace in September. Okay, but you're going to hear some of their stories, and they did some really wonderful things this year. They meet with us monthly to build connections with each other and to keep track of their progress. And they share their experiences and strategies with their colleagues on USIP's websites and at events such as this. So they serve as ambassadors and models for global peace-building education. Did I mention this entire program is virtual? So this is actually the first time these teachers have met in person, which is very exciting for us. So we use technology throughout the year to try to build these connections, but there's nothing like getting together in person. I, however, have had the privilege of visiting each of them this year and speaking with their students and colleagues and broader communities about USIP's peace-building work around the world. It was an excellent opportunity to hear what Americans in Kansas City, Missoula, Gainesville, and Tulsa are thinking about America's role in the world and about the important peace-building work that is happening right there in our teachers' hometowns. And I'm sure we'd be happy to talk a bit more about that as well. But the question remains, what is the impact of this program on our teachers, their students, and their communities? So to begin to answer this question, I would like to share with you a short video that's actually about our inaugural cohort, one of whom is here, Monica Shaw, sitting in the corner. Hey, Monica. So you'll see her in the video. But I wanted to share this video. It tells you a little bit about this program in the teachers' and students' own voices.
As a USIP's teacher, I learned that peace building is a skill, the ability to manage conflict and navigate to a peaceful outcome, not just in their personal lives, but for the sake of our communities.
I think this program is important because its goal is to normalize peace building. If we want students to be able to actually put their actions into practice, it needs to become an everyday part of their learning in the classroom.
My understanding of peace changed a lot. Originally, I thought of peace as just something very simple as not fighting, but now I realize how complicated it is.
The USIP Peace Teachers program is important because it helps students to learn in very meaningful ways. They also get to be very creative. They'll ask questions like, what if, and how might we?
We painted a mural on a wall, and it illustrates human rights, and it makes our community more beautiful.
My students really understand and want to know more about two concepts in particular, and those are empathy and vulnerability. We have these opportunities to help students inculcate a true understanding of how both empathy and vulnerability can be used in the process of mediation, in the process of negotiation.
When we would do something like reading and learning about the Declaration of Human Rights, I wanted students to not just see it as words on a piece of paper, but to see it in action in their community, in their lives. And so part of the service learning project was engaging with the local community experiencing homelessness. The least fortunate in our community, to them, were not just a stereotype, but they were people. And so everything became real at that moment.
Am I actively listening to my students? Am I showing empathy to my students who come from various backgrounds and have various experiences? They will mimic what you do, and it's very, very essential to being a peace teacher to actually model those behaviors and values that you want your students to practice.
By the end of this school year, I could actually see them in class discussion, genuinely listening to each other, trying to understand a different perspective than their own.
Our generation is a generation that's going to go out and help and, solve different conflicts around the world. So we definitely need to be aware of everything that's happening around us.
I'm a peace builder because I take it upon myself to spread the message of peace with my peers and community as a whole.
Peace!
We're going to have to make more room on that final slide to add our teachers from this year. With that, I would love to invite our 2017-2018 Peace Teachers and our moderator, Joanne Leda-Mackerman, to join me on stage, please. So coming up next are very brief presentations by each of our teachers to sort of frame the conversation for us so you can hear a little bit about what they've been up to this year. They are brief because we've given them a pretty strict time limit, but I think we're going to be a little more generous with them this morning. So it's a tall challenge for them to present a year in a very brief presentation, but they've been given it. And then following their presentations, we'll have a lively conversation with some questions from you all, hopefully, and maybe some of your own perspectives, as well as questions from anyone who's tuning in online. We have a colleague here who's keeping her eye on social media to gather your questions, so please do send them in. And this conversation will be moderated by our colleague Joanne Leda-Mackerman up here, whom we're honored to have join us today. So I'd love to just do some quick introductions of our teachers and our moderator this morning. Joanne Leda-Mackerman is a novelist, short story writer, and journalist whose works of fiction include The Dark Path to the River and No Marble Angels. She is vice president of PEN International and former chair of its Writers in Prison Committee. She serves on the boards of PEN American Center, PEN Faulkner Foundation, Poets and Writers, the International Crisis Group, Johns Hopkins University, and Refugees International, and is an emeritus board member of Human Rights Watch and Brown University, Brown University. A former reporter for the Christian Science Monitor, Joanne continues to publish articles and essays in newspapers, magazines, and books. She has taught writing at New York University, City University of New York, Occidental College, and in the Writers Program at the University of California at Los Angeles Extension. And as Nancy said, last but very much not least, she is a longtime member of the U.S. Institute of Peace's International Advisory Council. So we're so pleased to have you here today. Thank you for moderating this conversation for us. Our teachers, immediately to my left, that would be nobody. Immediately to my right, we have Amy Cameron, who is an English literature teacher at Grandview High School in Grandview, Missouri, which is just outside Kansas City, if you don't know Kansas City. She earned her bachelor's in broadcast journalism at Arizona State University and her master's in curriculum and instruction at Avila University in Kansas City. And I think we might have someone online tuning in from Avila, so hello. She taught 10 years at an alternative high school for at-risk youth, where she introduced her school to community service. As a result, the Grandview Alternative High School won the Presidential School of Service Award 5 years in a row. Amy was a finalist for Missouri's Teacher of the Year in 2000 and was recognized by the local CBS affiliate with the Crystal Apple Award, which honors outstanding Kansas City educators. To Amy's right, we have Maria Zelaya, who is a regular and international baccalaureate Spanish teacher at Eastside High School in Gainesville, Florida. She is a coordinator for Creative Active Service, a requirement of the IB program, and was a faculty advisor of Eastside Striders, a breast cancer awareness club, and Children Beyond Our Borders. She received a bachelor's degree in political science and 2 master's degrees in Latin American studies and political science from the University of Florida. Last but not least, we have Ezra Shearer, who is a social studies teacher at Sentinel High School in Missoula, Montana. He earned a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in secondary education at Ohio University. He's advised his school's Model United Nations program, debate team, and academic World Quest team. He recently completed the National Geographic Certified Educator program and regularly leads professional development workshops focused on education technology and geographic literacy. So I think you'll agree with me that we have a very accomplished panel of teachers up here. I would be remiss if I didn't mention a hole in our panel today. We do have a 4th Peace teacher from this year, Vince Faccioni. And I'm sorry he could not join us today. We miss him, and we want to express our appreciation for his good work this year and encourage you to read about his experience on our website, where he's written some reflection articles. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Amy up to the podium to kick off our first presentation.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Good morning. Okay, this mic and this mic is it?
They'll take care of it in 2 seconds.
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
Oh, other one.
That one. Okay, thank you.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, age before beauty today. My name is Amy Cameron, Grandview High School in Grandview, Missouri. It's an urban high school outside of Kansas City. We have a diverse population of students. 88% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. Overwhelming population of African American students with a rising population of the Hispanic students in our school. Wanted to talk about just briefly, these are the things that make me qualified as a teacher, I believe. I am a mother, I'm a teacher, of course, an advocate for literacy and for the environment and women's rights. I'm a learner, constant learner. I'm a citizen of the world. I want the rest of my students to believe that they are as well. I also have a great family that has influenced me. My father was a professor emeritus at the University of Kansas Medical Center. My mother was one of the first sports broadcasters in Kansas City. My sister's who here today, she is a physician, and my brother is a best-selling novelist. So I had to do something that Mom could talk about. Our students have a very narrow kind of lens of the world. They live in an area where many of them will never leave. they often saw their lives as being insignificant, and some of them have felt defeated. The violent images that they see every day is just part of their lives. I myself have been to 4 funerals of my students who have been killed. This is totally unacceptable. In the beginning, my students felt like they had no voice and that there was nothing they could do. At the very beginning of this curriculum, they said racism would always exist, that there was nothing they could do, and that's how their lives were meant to be. A lot of my male students said, I probably won't live to be 21. We started by scaffolding. We started with journaling about their experiences. We had quotes on the board that they had to respond to. We started introducing them to the Toolkit, which was conflict analysis and how to do active listening and what does it mean to be mindful. We looked at hate groups. We looked at hate speech. How do you combat that kind of ignorance? But we looked at how we ourselves perpetuate stereotypes and how silence really means acceptance. So we integrated the Peace Builders curriculum. They understood that conflict exists everywhere. We put push pins in the map of all the countries that were currently in conflict, and it filled the map. But the difference is, it didn't have to lead to violence. They chose Nobel Peace Prize winners. They had to research them, how they got it, and they learned that an individual can make a difference. We started in the classroom with an overriding question. Every day for the entire year, how can I be an effective peace builder? It was written on the board. We had an anti-bullying club. We started out where the kids wanted to do something in their own communities, so we started out small where they could do that. We had a mock United Nations. I have to say I'm very proud of them because they were put into these groups by random assignment of countries, and then they quickly became patriots of those countries. And when we had question and answering, we set it up like a mock United Nations. They would stand up and say, "Hi, I'm Clarence Brown, Chile. I would like to say..." So we had a teacher across the hall who came in with her kids from a political science class, and their job was to present a utopian society. They wanted to see if they could get accepted into the United Nations. And the two of us, the two teachers, sat in the back and we said, we have absolutely nothing to add to what they're saying. They asked the great questions. Our kids had learned so much from all the reading we had done that they, if someone came in and they said, well, in our country, college is free for everyone, all the homeless will be given houses, etc., our kids would raise their hand and say, how are you going to pay for this? How are you taxing your people? Who are your allies? What are you importing? What are what are your tariffs? What is your immigration policy? And the other kids would go back to her classroom and go, man, that was tough. Put together what is called project-based learning design. So what that means is that you come up with an idea with an overriding question and you give them all the autonomy in the world to work on it. We first studied genocide. We compared the Holocaust to the Holocaust in Rwanda, the genocide that occurred there, so that these kind of images would be something of the past. And this all started with a book called What is the What? By Dave Edgars, and that's what gave me the inspiration studying about the Lost Boys of Sudan, who took a 1,000-mile trek across the desert, ages ranging from 2 to 17, who had lost their families and were trying to go to different refugee camps. We were so fortunate. We had one of the original Lost Boys who had settled in Kansas City come to our school and talk to our kids. That was one of their major highlights. Another highlight is when we were honored to have Megan and Ambassador Bill Taylor come to our classroom and speak to our seniors. I remember in particular that you said what was a really good question is when one student asked, "Is peace possible?" And you said, "That's a very good question," but you proceeded to answer yes. The lesson they learned from What is the What, besides endurance and the human will to survive, was the importance of freedom and to eradicate violence everywhere we can. They came up with presentations of their own to answer the question, how can I be an effective peace builder? They blew me away with some of their ideas. They were put together into groups based on a variety of skill sets. They could either devise a campaign of awareness, they could create a product or attack a problem that way, they could handle a specific problem that way, educate the public, and the challenge was how do you sustain the program and how do you give it global significance? Just some of their ideas. As you can see, some of them wanted to do a specific area like South Sudan, mobile literacy lab that would drive from rural place to rural place in South Sudan to teach them how to read. We had kids that wanted to tackle the clean water problem with developing filters that could be sent and conduits to carry clean water. They wanted to educate and inform the entire world about human trafficking, which occurs everywhere in the world today. And they wanted to stop crime and bullying. It was very significant. They knew that the silence would not help, so their motto was see it, share it, stop it. And it gave people hope that if they started speaking up, we could get rid of crime. It tells you that one child, one teacher, one book can really change the world. Thank you.
Buenos días. My name is Maria Eugenia Zelaya. I am an immigrant born in Caracas, Venezuela. Came to the United States when I was 15 years old, and since then this has been my home. I am a proud Venezuelan Nicaraguan American, and I have been a high school teacher for the past 12 years. I work at Eastside High School in Gainesville, Florida. It's a public high school with a student population of about 1,200 kids. Our school has 3 programs: International Baccalaureate, Culinary Arts, and regular diploma. My students are culturally and socially diverse. At the beginning of my teaching career, the goal of my Spanish classes was to teach students the language and also the culture of the Spanish-speaking countries. That's the objective of most Spanish or language classes. I have been fortunate to be part of some amazing professional development programs, like Teachers for Global Classroom and now USIP Peace Teachers, that have changed the way I look at teaching a foreign language class. My class is no longer just a language class. It's a global issues, social justice, and peace-building class, using Spanish as a communication tool. The first week of classes, I introduced myself to my students, explained the requirements of my class, and told them that this year I was a peace teacher with USIP. I told them that I was going to incorporate peace-building curriculum into the class, and we were going to be celebrating International Peace Day. They all look at me and probably wonder, am I in a Spanish class? On September 21st, I was able to put together an all-day program to celebrate International Day of Peace with the help of 2 of my colleagues, a AP Human Geography teacher and a History of the Americas teacher. The program focused on the theme, being peace builders in our own communities. The students heard from a city commissioner, a Peace Corps volunteer, a university student that worked on peace projects, and a professor that talked about the most recent peace agreements in Colombia. They also had the opportunity to work on some hands-on activities, peace cranes that we sent to students in Israel, Colombia, and Kenya. They made peace rocks for our faculty and staff. And we made also postcards for child refugees. The day after the activity, I had a follow-up with my classes, and I asked them, what can you do to bring peace to EHS or ESI? The students' main concern was the lack of unity among the three programs that we have in our school, and how they need to work together to achieve their goals. My challenge now was not just to bring into the peace-building curriculum in my classes, but also find ways to bring those three groups from our school together. In my advanced Spanish classes, we started the conversation about conflict and peace with the Declaration of Human Rights. They learned that there are many places in the world where people are still fighting to get basic human rights. Students researched places around different countries, didn't have to be Spanish-speaking countries, and found those specific cases where the human rights were violated. We created a big puzzle, and each of the pieces represented the article and also the specific case. They also presented in Spanish. After this project, we continued covering different topics related to social justice and global issues. We discussed specifically what conflict is and how conflict is part of everyday life. The students learned how conflict affects children, in particular the case of child soldiers, with the example of the civil war in El Salvador in the 80s, and also the conflict in Colombia. For my lower level Spanish classes, it was a little bit more difficult. Because of the level of Spanish they have, it was kind of difficult for them to have a conversation in the language. With them, I redesigned a group project to include the peace curriculum. In a small group, the students read stories of peace builders and different places where USIP was working on bringing peace. Each group created a peace story, or cuento de paz, for children. Some of the groups used ideas from everyday life. Other ones focused on international conflict. One group, for example, created a story where a group of ants were fighting for the same piece of cake. And at the end, they understood that there was enough cake for everyone. They actually used the example of the Israel-Palestine conflict. During the school year, one of my students approached me with the idea of painting a mural that will include students from all of our programs and also talk about the theme of unity. She came up with the idea after International Day of Peace. For her, it was important to learn about conflict and peace and to learn about what other countries were doing to promote peace. But more important was to have peace in her own school. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this year, a lot of things have happened in our schools across the nation. Students don't feel safe and are afraid that their school may be the next Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. As teachers, we're there to guide our students and give them facts, teach them different subject areas, but we can also guide them when they come up with ideas for change. I still have my second challenge, bringing the three groups together in our school, and the mural was a perfect way to address this challenge. I worked with a student on getting materials and permission for the mural. The ideal opportunity came when a group of 10 students and 3 teachers from the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador, came to visit our school in a language, cultural, and community service trip. Our visitors talked to the different classrooms in the school, did cultural presentations for all of our programs, and their art teacher helped us with the mural, and we have students from all of our programs and our visitors working together to create this mural. Throughout the year, both my students and I learned from this program. I learned about the work of USIP and how to incorporate peace building into my classes. My students learned about peace and conflict and peace building efforts in other countries, but also our immediate world change. We went from putting all this idea about peace and conflict from the global to the local and found the need to change our world. This year was just the beginning of a journey to teach peace building. There are many projects in the works for next year with great community partners and amazing student leaders. I would like to finish with this quote that I have displayed in my classroom. Deja que el mundo te cambie y podrás cambiar el mundo. Let the world change you and you can change the world.
Hi. Is this? Sorry, all right. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. They told me this was the most important presentation of our entire lives, and they actually said if we don't get it right, our flights are canceled, and we're gonna be stuck in D.C. So, good morning. I'm Ezra Shear. I'm from Missoula, Montana. Thank you for being here. It's really inspiring that there's so many people here in this community that believe that education is as valuable as we all know it is. So thank you for that. Oh, the laser is green too. All right, so I'm going to give you a little background, and we'll talk about the year. So why I teach. I grew up in Athens, Ohio. I attended Ohio University. It is the Harvard on the Hawking. So the Hawking River goes right through, and we're a little bit of Ivy League there too. It was founded in 1804, but it's in Appalachia, Ohio. This is old coal mining community, and I was a son of privilege. My father was an ER doctor. We had 5 kids. We never for want, but we were always reminded of those around us. And when other kids in high school went down to Florida and Daytona Beach, I was going on Habitat for Humanity build-a-thons to build a house in a week and things like that. And I didn't have to go away to see that, because in Athens we saw poverty all around us in Appalachia, or Appalachia. That's a test you'll have to take someday in your life. But my goal to become an educator was to try to find 2 kids out of 100 to make it to college in my community, to kind of end that little cycle of poverty that I knew was so pervasive in that community. Life changes plans, and I met the love of my life, and we moved to Missoula, Montana in 2010, and I started working at Sentinel High School there shortly after. Now, Montana is different, and many of us know Montana because that's where Brad Pitt likes to fish. And this is the Blackfoot River where he is standing, and that is the Clark Fork River in downtown Missoula. So while the fisher people in Missoula aren't as beautiful as Brad Pitt, right? We do see this on a regular basis, but this is Missoula. It's a long way, and it's a small town, and that's our little community. And I found myself here in Missoula, Montana. This urban center of western Montana is a very different sort of place. It's a big city in Montana terms. It is the urban population center. We do have 2 Walmarts, which is great. But we also have plenty of small local bookstores and local grocery stores. The total population of the city is about 76,000 people. It's very white, I'll just say it plainly, right? So it's a very homogeneous community. It's probably around 86 to 90% Caucasian, with the balance being to a variety of different minority groups. And it's home to the University of Montana. In Missoula, there's about 2,400 people per square mile. Here in D.C., there's 11,000 people per square mile. So you do have a lot more people living in your city. It's a very big place here. But I think we have 2 senators, and you guys have how many? I don't know. You guys should work on that. I really think you should. Like, shouldn't you? All right, but anyway, so I found myself in Montana, and for those of you who are wondering why Wyoming was highlighted, thank a teacher for that. But yes, that's Montana in red, right? You got it, okay. Sorry. It worked better yesterday, didn't it? So I also found myself teaching in a community at Sentinel High School that was not the same sort of high school I envisioned. And so my mission had to change a bit, and that brings us to where we are today. Sentinel High School is a really great school. It's small by big city standards, big by Montana standards, but it is also a really homogeneous group, as in it's just another giant school filled with white kids. And they're relatively affluent. There's only 26% of our building that's on free and reduced lunch, which is our code word for poor kids. And they don't have exposure the way students from other places have exposure. And so I found my students not having the same skills that other students have, just when it comes to tolerating people with differences and moving beyond what that stereotype is. Because everything that they encounter is informed by the things that reinforce the stereotypes we all have about other people on a regular basis. I want you to imagine, it's going to be really hard, especially if you're from a big city, but you can go days, weeks in Missoula without seeing a person of color. That's a different world. And for my students in Sentinel High School, they're going to college. The majority of my students are definitely going to be going to college, and the majority of my students will not live and die and breathe their entire lives in Montana. And the Peace Building Toolkit and this curriculum I viewed as a tool to kind of equip my students to be successful once they leave high school. And my mission changed to make college affordable and to ensure that the students who are graduating from Sentinel High School would be well equipped to navigate the 21st century world and to solve the problems that are not being solved. And so that's why I started incorporating this curriculum here. My students, I teach 4 different subjects over the course of the last year, which was very challenging: AP Human Geography, AP Seminar, AP World History, and a geography class. The majority of my students are freshmen and sophomores. These classes are all academic elective classes. You can graduate from our high school without ever taking a world history or geography class. You can graduate by taking only U.S. government and only U.S. history, and then you can go off. But almost all our students who go to college take a geography or a world history class. But that gives you a sense of who these students are. What else? Oh yeah, this is really important. These students, my students, our students, they get a bad rap because of Snapchat and social media and our stereotypes of them. But they are really eager to affect change, and it's up to us to kind of leverage that. But we have these stereotypes built in about who these teenagers are. And I think like a generation ago, the stereotypes were different, but always negative about these kids. But they are inspiring young people. And the more you can interact with teenagers, the more you will understand that they are ready to make a difference because they are tired of seeing differences just never be made. And so what I found was, over the course of the year with this peace-building curriculum, I was able to really help equip, or at least I think I was, those students to do that. And it started with one day for the International Peace Day Challenge. The USIP wanted us to create Twitter accounts and have a hashtag. And if you ever are in a room with high schoolers, you know they don't like Twitter. They just don't, all right? Snapchat's cool, Instagram is all right. But anyway, so the USIP curated this video, and they wanted us to show it to the students, and they had all these hashtags in it. And I thought it was like really, really cheesy. It was well made, but I was just like, I don't want to show this to my kids. I really don't. But I showed it to the students, and we watched this video, and then I turned around, and they were super excited to get working on peace building and take the peace challenge seriously. They really were, because it was giving them an opportunity to celebrate and try to create some change. And that was kind of like a switch for me. And it was at the beginning of the year, and I saw students who were really excited to start doing this work. So across my 4 disciplines, I implemented the peace teaching curriculum in a variety of different ways. In AP Seminar, in AP Seminar, which is a new course from the College Board. It's about collaboration and interdisciplinary studies. It's a research methods course for high schoolers, which is pretty cool. But one of the key components of that is communication and collaboration. And the Peace Building Toolkit has a variety of different lessons built into it. Part of it is conflict analysis and definitional work about looking at contemporary conflicts. But the other set of tools that are there are for giving people the ability to actually mitigate conflict in their lives through communication and collaboration. So there's role-playing activities and negotiation strategies. My students really like negotiating curfew extensions, and so we did a lot of role plays with that. But in AP seminar, it looked different than it did in geography. And they also have this really fun tool called the conflict styles assessment, where you go on and you take a survey and it identifies your personal style of conflict, because we all experience conflict in our lives. So I had the seminar students go through, I actually had all my students do this, and identify their conflict style. And then I put the students into groups based on their conflict style to try to create as much conflict between them as possible. That's kind of who I am. But the results were really great. In my human geography class, it was most sustained there for my freshmen because I didn't have the constraints of the AP course kind of holding us there. And for that, I went in and out of teaching the conflict analysis with contemporary conflicts and the real-world communication and peace-building skills. So we do the role plays, and then we sit down and do the academic work. And the students really saw the academic conflict research in a different light after going through the peace-building tools. We'll kind of end it there. Over the course of the year, this peace-building toolkit, every teacher gets a new curriculum. You get kind of excited in the summer to implement it, and we took an online course that the USIP offers. You guys should check those out. They didn't tell me to say that, but they're really great. But you get really excited, and then your ambitions kind of fall to pieces, and you pick them back together. But there are so many lessons in this toolkit that you can use in a variety of different settings and across different disciplines, and our students need them because they're all built on communication, collaboration, and most importantly, critical thinking, to analyze things from multiple perspectives rooted in research and empathy, really, because that's what critical thinking is really about. Everybody wants this in the world. Colleges want it, employers want it, and this curriculum and what we're doing, we now have a new responsibility. And we can talk about civics, but we are in a world that is more interconnected as every single day passes. And this really was a year of civics for the 21st century, and it was terrific. And I'm happy to be here, and I hope my plane ticket is still booked. We'll see. Thank you so much.
Well, wouldn't you like to be in all of those classes in high school again? This is really very inspiring. We don't have as much time as I know we all want to have, but I do want to frame this discussion today on the day that all the Thai soccer children got out, and the coach, and the world. Really, so many the U.S., European countries, China, all came together to do what they knew how to do, their little piece of something to save these lives and make this happen. So is peace possible? Yes. I mean, and I think, and it's sort of miraculous things are possible when you look at that. And I was thinking, what made that? All of those skill sets that made it happen. And part of it was the goal. Nobody was arguing about this goal, you know, saving lives. So I think that, and the other important issue of that is those were all young people. In the countries where there are conflicts, many of them in the world, over half of the population are usually under 20 years old. So they are the young people that will either be in conflict or solving conflict. And the last sort of overarching theme that I want to sort of put on the table is that we think of peace building as being, you know, bridge building. In a bridge, there's this here, you got to get across it. But peace is also a fabric, and it is civil society. It is the fabric of countries, and those are 100,000 threads. And I think that's important. And so what's happening in these high schools may not be out at the negotiating table at the UN to get North Korea to give up its weapons, but it's building the fabric of the society that doesn't have to be at that stage. And so I'm very inspired by all three of you. In our discussion before, we were talking about problem solving, and each of you brought that up in a way that so many young people feel that they just don't have a voice. How do you solve problems? Why does my role matter? And I think that that's a very important aspect, and I'd love to just pivot there, and maybe Ezra, have you talk a little bit about what we were talking about before, about your putting that on the table with the students, and each of you. How do students from the beginning of your year to the end realize they do have a voice in solving problems?
Sure. I'm sorry, I was just still kind of adrenaline. So,
and his sense of humor is great in peacekeeping.
Can I pivot? Sorry. Amy
Yes,
really is a great problem solver.
Okay, Amy, you can. Whoever wants to take it up. This is a conversation.
Well, mine was my students. It was a great transformation because, like I said at the very beginning of the year, these were kids that just felt like everything was inevitable, and the inevitability of their lives was that most of them were going to die at the hands of violence. They didn't see any recourse for that. The scaffolding of lessons through the whole first semester started giving them some tools. And then again, the overreaching question, how can I be a peace builder, gave them accountability. When they got into their different groups to work on it, they had all these ideas of how peace could be attained. But then the challenge, of course, was the global significance, because a lot of them started in their own backyards. But that's fine, because when you start there, that is important. And kind of the pay it forward kind of mentality on that. But they started to address the need, started to find out that there was something they could do. And just by studying the Nobel Peace Prize winners, it's not that they examined the resumes of these people, it's that they thought one person can make a difference. And that made them think, well, I could be that person. Yeah.
Anybody have specific problems in your communities or globally that they felt they had at least taken steps to solve in this year of peace building?
Like I mentioned, when we did the event, the celebration of International Peace Day, I had 3 different classes, each class period throughout the day. And I want to make sure I had my students that were mostly IB with the major program kids and then the culinary arts in the same room. Different subjects, but just talking. And of course, this part was not in Spanish, only one of the presentations. I just want to make sure I bring everyone together. And when they were together, they say, well, we're all like kids. We're all students in the same high school, but we don't see each other. Only in the hallways, we don't talk to each other. So for them, that was their issue. Like, if we're talking about peace, yes, we're talking about these global issues and how other countries are solving this conflict. But how about if we start at home? So that's how they decided to start like this unity theme, working together. And for me, the big thing was just having those group of kids at the end of the year just painting. It was as simple as a mural, just painting together, putting their hands on the wall. Didn't matter what neighborhood, what classes they took, if they were IB or AP or major program, they were just together working. So that's building peace.
And for us, some of our students, they get kind of caught in this idea like, too complicated, too busy, what's the simple solution? And an example, immigration would be a great example of that. And so, hey, we need to get rid of NAFTA and keep people from stealing our jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. And so we looked at lots of different issues, contemporary conflicts, but also immigration through a lens that allowed them to see all this nuance. So we researched and looked at dairy farms in New York. And then we looked at a farming community in central Mexico that literally wasn't able to farm anymore, and they started to see that the impacts of NAFTA were much more complicated because they couldn't farm pork in Mexico, which is what they had been doing for a long time anymore. And so having students be able to see complicated issues and problems through different lenses, I think made it more accessible Rather than just shutting it down and just saying there's no solution, it allowed students to say, oh, look at all these different perspectives and lenses on this one issue. This is way more complicated than I thought it would be, but then it allows them to have this understanding. And then they get frustrated that the people in power don't solve the problems because they think they have all the answers as they are teenagers. But
well, I think that's very interesting too, because what you are also looking at is the critical thinking that's so important, and it's breaking down big problem into component parts, and knowing how to touch it. Now, one question: in this work you're doing with the students, do the parents get involved? Do you hear back from the parents? Conversations penetrate into the community?
Well, I think that in my experience and I came to Washington, D.C. a few years ago for an Educational Trust Foundation conference, and they talked about low socioeconomic schools and what made them high-achieving schools. And the common denominator was that they had parent involvement. We don't really have that at my school. Part of it is because both parents work. So they can't come to all of these events. And there may not be a place for them to go and study when they get home. And they may not. We do have the one-to-one initiative for computers, so they all have a computer. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have so much of the parent involvement because of that. But I do know that several of the kids kind of changed their perspective as far as what their goals were going to be. Some of them said, well, I could work for an NGO and I could work for some sort of philanthropic and actually get paid for it and study that in college because I want to help people. Great. So I had a new direction to take.
Good. Maria, did you have that crossover from students to parents in the conversation of the activities?
The parents are very supportive, especially with the IB classes. With the regular classes, it's kind of hard to get the parents involved. But the feedback from the parents was like the kids love the class. They're talking about all these issues. They're learning about the world, but they're using Spanish as a tool. And that's something that I want to emphasize. All this is done in the classroom is done in Spanish. So when we're talking about, like, for example, the civil war in El Salvador, the discussion is in Spanish. They read articles from newspapers, from magazines. We watch short films. And everything is happening in Spanish. It may not be the perfect Spanish, but it's Spanish. Mm-hmm. And that's what they get at the end. They say, no, my kid now, they see the importance. I have one particular student that at the beginning of the year, she came up to me and she said, I can't do Spanish. So don't even try. Like, of course you're going to try and you're going to do it. And, but she was very determined. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. I'm like, you're going to do it. And I do pen pals in my class with a sister classroom in Colombia, and we have the other one in Galapagos. And I say, don't worry, you're going to get a pen pal. Really? Yes, and you're going to talk to the person in Spanish. She was so inspired. By the end of the school year, one of the parents came to me and said, well, she wants to go to Colombia, or she wants to go to the Galapagos. When we actually got the group of 10 kids from Galapagos, she hosted one of the kids. And she was so happy. I don't know what the conversation was. It was English or Spanish, but they communicated. And then the parent was so happy because she was doing Spanish. She actually did it. So
okay. Great.
Not a whole lot of parent involvement in terms of feedback. It's you guys know, sometimes parent feedback cannot be a good thing for a classroom. and so honestly, there's some apprehension about taking an issue where there's talking points and students seem to want to repeat those talking points and then really breaking them down into the nuance. That can be dangerous for some teachers in some districts. And so that is a fear. In terms of feedback from parents, conversations that students have with their parents are most valuable, and we really encourage students to talk to the parents about the issues we discuss in class, but nothing more involved.
Into the community. Good.
Yeah.
Now, we want to be able to have time for questions, and I had 11:05 is the time we opened this up to questions, so we're having a short discussion, but it's 11:05. So, and we have questions from the audience here, and then we also have those coming in from online. So I think there are people with microphones. So their microphones are up here. So if you could just raise your hand.
Hi, sorry, I came late. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm vice president of an NGO called Global Peace Services USA. We work on peace building and conflict resolution internationally and in the U.S. The question to you about bringing together kids in different streams in the school who had not really spoken to each other. Mm-hmm. These kids come from different socioeconomic levels. They have access to different kinds of privileges. They use language differently. How did this coalesce? How did people respect the discourse of other people, their frames of reference, and the difference in privilege where a kid might go with family to vacation, you know, in Europe, and other kids would never have that? Could you talk about how you handled that?
Yes. The first encounter was during the celebration of international peace. So I had chosen the speakers to make sure they had like good talking points. Like the best one throughout the day was the city commissioner. The city commissioner that we invited, he's very young. I think he's not even like 30. And he's Mexican American. So he was really able to relate with the kids. So he said, well, this is our community. This is Gainesville. So it doesn't matter where you come from. What are the issues? So they saw, okay, we're talking about school safety. We're talking about parks. We're talking about cleaning rivers. And they saw each other as like not from different neighborhoods, but just we have a common goal. And then at the end of the year, when we brought them together for the mural, I think what brought them, like the glue that stick everything together, was the kids from Ecuador. Because they went to the classrooms of major program kids, English classes, and talked to them. And they said, well, these kids are from another country, and they're talking to us. And they talk about simple stuff, music. At the end of one of the classes, they were dancing. Like the Ecuadorians were showing how you dance salsa, and then our kids were showing how they dance rap. So it's like they took pictures together. So when the other ones came in, it was like, oh, but we have somebody in common, the Ecuadorians. So for them, it was just, we're just kids. We're just doing this together. It didn't matter. They didn't talk about trips or you have money or you don't have money. It was just plain like kids talk. Yeah.
My name's Christina Dry. I'm a student at Georgetown University, but my parents are both teachers, and I taught Model UN for many years, so this is kind of close to my heart as well. My specific question to you is, what change did you specifically see in your students after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting? I mean, I think that was probably about 7 months into your curriculum, so by then they should have had some sense of autonomy. So what change did you see after they saw the students also having such an impact in their world with the March for Our Lives, etc.?
Well, I can speak to that if that's okay. Ferguson had just happened too. You know, with these kids took that very personally. So there was a great feeling of this a rising tension, and that's why they felt like, well, racism is always going to exist. Look what's happening, and a reluctance to want to meet any kind of authority, even halfway, because there was that distrust. And so several of my students, much to my surprise, these were kids that often got into trouble, you know, in school, not in my class, but they decided that they wanted to go down and talk to the SRO officers assigned to the school. They wanted to talk about how they could broker a peace between the neighborhood kids and the police department. And they wanted to talk to the police about how do we get you to stop pulling over kids because they're black. And it was a very powerful moment for them. And they were the ones that said, we have to start speaking up. So they said, okay, if you see something, you share it, and that's how you stop it. And so these were the kids, and they wanted, you know, to call it like donuts with the police or something. And then they were saying how that could translate this fear of authority and get rid of the corruption when you meet on neutral ground.
If I can add something.
Yes, please.
For us, it was very close to home. Yeah. What my students felt, they were just like we can't do anything. Like our hands are tied. I'm like, no. You know you can create change. They're like, well, nobody's going to listen to us because we're teenagers. I'm like, no. You have representatives. You have a city commissioner. You have people that will listen. Just write letters. And they were like, oh, can we write letters to them? I'm like, of course you can write letters to them. You can call them. You can email them. You can go and talk to them in person. So that's how they started to this change. And one of the students, the one that led the mural, she also organized Unity Day at our school. And again, she met with kids from the different programs just to make sure that we had representation and that it was not just the issue of the school safety, but whatever issue they want to bring. If it was immigration or the environment, whatever, I told her just open it up. Because this unity is for change. And change, I mean, every person has a different goal. So that's how, you were in my class and they were very tense also that day.
Yeah, if I might jump in. I mean, I had the pleasure of visiting all of your schools and students and then spending also a little more time in your communities as well. And something that I was really struck with was all of your points, but Ezra, you made it also in your presentation, that students are looking for ways to get involved. And we always talk to young people about what action can you take for peace? How do you build peace locally and globally? And the ideas they had were off the charts. And I think we don't stop to ask those questions often enough. And I mean, a theme that I heard across the board for the teachers here, yesterday we spent a lot of time chatting about their experience over the year. And one thing they talked about was that in classrooms you don't talk about peace. It's not something that comes up very often. We talk maybe a lot about conflict, especially through the lens of war, but we don't talk as much about peace. So young people don't think about what it means, and they don't think about how they can actually get involved to drive change and build a more peaceful community. But once you really break it down and really talk about what does peace mean, what are the different steps of peace, what are the actions you can take, who are the serious people doing this work, and that includes young people. If I may tell a quick little anecdote, we work with young people all the time. They come here, we host student groups at USIP, and they're from all around the country, and these are middle and high school students. And one of the things we do with them is ask them, we do this quiz, it's called the Peace Builder Quiz. It's in your toolkits too. But we ask them they start off by just listing 5 peace builders. Who are 5 people that you can name who are peace builders? And they have a pretty easy time with that. And then it starts to break it down, and they get to being asked, who are 5 women peace builders? Not very many people can complete that. Who are 5 peace builders under the age of 30? And they maybe get Malala, right? She ends up on every list. And so we have this conversation at the end of our time with them. We have them for maybe an hour and a half. Why did you not put yourself on that list? How do you consider yourselves to be peace builders? And after they really talk about it, they realize, because we associate it usually with famous dead people for the most part. The people that we learn about sometimes in school, but we don't stop to think about how are we as young people peace builders? These are things you can be doing every day. And I saw your young people thinking about that when I visited, that through the work you've been doing with them, they really could understand the steps they can take to be building peace and make those connections between what they see happening in their communities and globally. And it was so inspiring. So I just wanted to make sure.
Well, and I just want to add one more thing to what Maria said when you talked about, you can write letters, because I was telling my kids to write letters, and one thing they found out is who represents them in their states, because they honestly didn't know. And they said, well, are they going to listen to us? And I go, oh, you're seniors. You're voting. They want to hear from you. So
Good. Let me give one question that came in over the internet. How can your students use the knowledge you've given them through the Peace Teacher Program in order to impact change now as students? We've sort of talked about that, but...
Sure. There's 2 different ways to look at it. The first one is how they're going to use it in their everyday lives, and they will use it in their everyday lives. I have every confidence in that. I started using it more in my everyday life. Quick story. So, I'm teaching this little communication lesson, how to communicate appropriately. Forget exactly which one. There's several. And Monica and I it was an active listening lesson. Monica, my wife, we had this little argument, as people do. And the next morning I go up and I open up our toolkit and we look at our lesson and I just take a picture of it and it's like active listening skills and sent it off to her. And so they'll use it in their everyday life. I think importantly on a global scale is being able to look at something like Syria or Yemen or the Kashmir or Israel and Palestine or Nigeria and just be able to pause for a second with what they're being fed and really question what that is, and then say, what do these stakeholders all want? How many are there? And really look at it in the more complexity and not be intimidated by the complexity of the global
Do
issue.
you ever break that down into the society itself so that it's not all up here with the governments talking and arguing, but it's actually the citizens within that society?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and what those citizens are doing. Yeah. Anybody else want to respond to that? Or
well, for example, there's one lesson which is just real, it's like an opening, an anticipatory set to a classroom where you draw a line down the middle of the classroom and you get a couple of kids on each side. You tell them aside that you have to get the people on the other side of the line to cross that line. You can promise them anything, you can threaten them, you can do whatever you want to do. You can lie to them. And you tell the other kids the same thing. And then I tell both sides, whoever gets them to pass will get extra credit. So the stakeholders are real. And they will say anything to each other, and they never cross that line. And the lesson was learned is, what if you both want what you want, but you're not willing to give in at all? So
they never turned on you? They never turned on you? No, set up the paradigm?
They said that I had promised certain things that I didn't promise. But, like, if you cross the line, Miss Cameron won't give you a final. And they were like, some kids hesitated.
I told my students for that lesson that you couldn't use violence to get the other person across. And so one of my students came and gave someone a big hug and just brought them across.
Nobody challenged the paradigm itself.
Technically wasn't violent,
okay.
But still, it was a use of force.
Okay. Okay. Do you want anything, or we'll go get another question? Okay. Back there.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Ramirez, and I go to Theodore Roosevelt High School in DC, and I'm from El Salvador. So my question is really simple. I was thinking about my dad as a teacher, and my grandpa was a teacher too. So the questions that I was asked is, do you think it's okay that United States has a peace class, so they can teach us about how to solve problems with peace, and what is the peace about, and how big problems like World War II, Civil War, Vietnam War was actually solved by peace and by legally.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. As Megan was alluding to, we talk about wars, and it's like, here's World War II, and then there was a bomb, and now the Cold War, and then we went to Vietnam, and it's all war, and we don't talk about that peace component to it. I think that requiring a course for every high school in the United States is probably not going to happen, but I think what you're alluding to is a civics-based class that emphasizes this, and there's agencies that could do that work and advocate on behalf of that, and I think it's critical and absolutely important. So,
I do want to say, though, I do disagree with you on one aspect of that, and that is districts usually bow down a little bit to parental wishes. If you were to get people in your district and the parents to call the central office and the administrators and say, we want this class, they would eventually put it in the curriculum.
So agency is important. Okay.
I know in my case, since I teach IB, and in the curriculum of Spanish IB, we're allowed to have a unit on peace and conflict. So I do have that freedom. And that's one of the things that I'm going to change for next year. Since I already did 1 year of peace teacher, now I can change other things. Mm-hmm. But you can also get around that without having the class, just having a peace club. That's
absolutely.
And do you want to spend a minute just talking about a peace club for those that don't quite know what one is?
Do you want to?
Yeah, Amy?
Well, I'm happy to introduce the idea, but then I'd love to hear how you all...
Why don't we let them how they implemented it, because we don't have much time left.
Great.
Well, in my case, the idea was came out to the students after Megan talked to them. Like, she's been holding in the school. And In my particular school, there's like, within the Peace Club, we're going to have 2 different groups. The ones that want to talk about international conflict and how to solve conflict, all the tools in the toolkit, and also the other ones that want to keep working on that unity at school. So I say everything is fine, everything is valid. So if we're going to have a Peace Club with 2 different sections, I'm okay with that. So that's a way to overcome not having a class.
Mm-hmm. And it could start as a service club. I mean, that's part of the humanitarian efforts anyway. So it can start as, that's what we did in our school. Since last year I had mostly seniors, this year I get to start over with, I'm going to be the only 9th grade English teacher next year. And so I get to do this all over again. And that would be a great time to implement that kind of club, a Peace Club, and then 4 years of curriculum changes.
Okay. Megan, do you want to add anything about what
No, it's
the goal of
great to hear how you implemented it. For those who don't know what it is, we have something on our website called our Peace Club Starter Kit. And it was in response to hearing from young people that there's a lot that can be taught to them through educators, but young people can teach themselves a lot too. Mm-hmm. So the Starter Kit puts into the hands of the youth in schools to say, you can start a club where you're teaching yourselves these skills and learning these concepts and taking some action around issues that you care about of conflict and peace in your community and world. And so I love to hear stories of how people have taken it and run with it in a lot of different ways.
And Vincent, who isn't here with us today, really killed it when it came to...
Tell about what he did. Yeah.
His Peace Club just took off like wildfire. It was just really successful in his school.
In Oklahoma.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I just want to give a shout out.
Good. No, thank you for doing that. That's good to do that. Another question way in the back.
Mustafa Haider Imran from Pakistan. I have a question that is there any study or research, someone from you, have you carried out any research to analyze the impact of peace-building curriculum and the impact of the violence-based movies, cartoons, and the games our children watch? So which one is most effective and it has lasting impact on the behavioral patterns of our children in forthcoming days? So which one is effective? Thank you so much.
If I can, I'll jump in on that. So broadly, for this program in particular, we evaluated ourselves, and so we use surveys with our teachers and their understanding of their students' evolution of change through the year. So we look at our program and evaluate it with our teachers of the year. More broadly speaking, USIP has been involved in peace-building education overseas for a long time. And I believe that we've actually funded, I think there's a publication that we have out on, maybe a few years old at this point, but looking at grants that we've given around peace-building education and an evaluation of them. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we've done some work on that. I don't know more broadly. I'm sure there's a ton of studies out there that you can find. I don't know about violence, video game, movie violence. I'm sure there are also studies on that too, but I think that they're still learning a lot more about that. But USIP has not explored that angle in our work.
Any of you want to respond to?
Nothing quantitative.
Yeah.
So. It's just mostly anecdotal at this point.
This will probably have to be our last question. And I might say some of the questions on the internet we've sort of answered, I think, in other questions that have come up. Yes, in the middle there.
Okay. Hi, my name is Heavenly. I'm a student at Friendship Collegiate Academy in Northeast. My question is, the children that I'm around, you grow up in a certain environment, they bestow this mindset upon you. Most of them are really discouraged. So implementing peace and everything, and with like reality shows, drama sells. So the kids, they love it. They love the conflict, it's entertaining. So my question to you would be, how do you encourage people to learn about peace and really use it in their life? Children, that is.
I can tell you that we did one thing that was kind of funny, because we talked about what entertains us. That conflict often entertains us, And in my own classroom, I had gotten a couple of excerpts from some talk shows where the people on the talk show just went at each other. And I would take the sound off and we would watch the body language. And I'd say, what can we learn just by looking at the nonverbal language? And they said, no one's listening to anyone. And I said, absolutely. And I said, and what does this do when you have a hand in your face? What does this do? And they talked about that. So they had to get used to starting to talk like they couldn't use their hands in people's faces when they disagreed with each other, and they had to keep their hands down. And they finally got to the point where they were becoming so articulate in their arguments, but it's the act of listening. That was the key. Listen to what this person is saying and try to think of it in terms of what is it that they want. Okay? And then, because it might be something completely different. So don't just formulate an answer before you've completely heard the other person. And it helped communication all the time and mediation with the kids in our classroom.
Yep. Either of you want to respond to that?
I was just going to add, one of the first aspects is that it's not about avoiding conflict, it's about resolving conflict and maintaining peace. And so that aspect where you don't just have to avoid the problem altogether, which is usually how, especially in the media, they build conflict, is through avoidance and lies, and then it reaches a climax. But to let them just understand that it is okay to bring the conflict to the forefront so it can be discussed, whether it's interpersonal or on a larger scale. I think that helps answer maybe.
Well, I hope this has been interesting. There will be a reception afterwards. Megan will wrap us up. I'd like to just take three important thoughts that are away. One, listen. Two, find that place of empathy. And think of this as problem solving. And then finally, I also think the idea, when we think of the fabric of our society, think of it as a fabric. All these strands are hugely important. So it's not just, I can't go over and solve a global problem, but I can solve this. And if I could just end with one small note that does relate to a Nobel Peace Prize winner, then I've been very engaged and involved with. This is the first Chinese citizen to win, named Liu Xiaobo. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. He was in prison in China because of what he wrote and worked on to try to bring democracy to China. He was called sort of the Nelson Mandela of China. And in his final statement to the court, he said, I have no enemies, I have no hatred. And he discussed why that was. And he said that if you want to have a society that doesn't have hatred, has freedom and expression, you individually have to begin imbibing that. You have to not have hatred. You have to express that. And he went through that. Now, many of his colleagues, when he died in prison last year, said, would he have said that if he knew what his end would be? And those who knew him well said he would have, because he understood the commitment, the individual and sort of spiritual commitment that takes to build the society you want. And so all of these students, I think that's what we're doing. And then to end on a happier note, today, his wife, who had been essentially under house arrest for the whole 10 years, flew out of China today and landed in Helsinki for the first time. So this is a nice thing. So thank you. I'll let Megan, you wrap it up.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for a great conversation. Joanne, thank you for moderating this wonderful conversation. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you will continue joining us and continue the conversation out with coffee. So please linger. Come and meet our teachers. Come and meet our wonderful moderator. And thank you so much, and we'll hope to see you at USIP again soon.